let's get into the Gabriel Rockhill, shall we? Da, 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 da. Okay. The Intellectual World War. Who paid the pipers of Western Marxism? Gabriel Rockhill. Advanced praise. This is just reviews. I don't think we need this. Do, do, do. What I like to do at the beginning of a text is just kind of browse through the chapters here, okay? One page of chapters, respectable, organized, on point. Love it. Off to a great start. Okay. First chapter, opening salvo of the Intellectual World War. Oh, it's not a chapter. Okay. So, introduction to the Intellectual World War. Part 1, Imperial Knowledge. Okay. With 3 chapters. Intermezzo. There's an intermission in your book? I'm sorry. Okay. All right. Part 2, compatible critical theory with 3 chapters. Conclusion, imperial versus anti-imperial Marxism or the scourge of Western Marxism. Appendix. Okay. Not bad. It's only 344 pages. We'll finish this in no time, chat. To Jennifer Ponce de Leon. This book has benefited immensely from the constant intellectual exchange that is our daily life, as well as from the love and encouragement that fostered the courage necessary to pursue its conclusions to the very end. My gratitude is infinite. Aw. Aw. That's sweet. Psychological warfare is a weapon. As the airplane, the 155mm gun, the patent tank, the bazooka are weapons, so is psychological warfare. Study for the Psychological Strategy Board of the U.S. government. Psychological strategy is not a separate course of action, but an integral component of all our policies and programs, economic, military, and political. Panel report for the U.S. Psychological Strategy Board, prepared by C.D. Jackson. Time, Henry Kissinger, Harvard. Philip Mosley, Columbia. Max Millikan, MIT, et al. Acknowledgements. Thank you, colleagues, friends, etc. I assume I never care about these abbreviations. This is important. Okay, we're probably going to have to come back here. Page 11. FBI is defined here. That's funny. DOJ, thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you. Da 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 da. Okay. Good. Thank you. Opening salvo of the Intellectual World War. Ideas are not only an instrument to create consciousness so that the people fight, but ideas have become the main instrument of struggle. Not an inspiration, not a guide, not an orientation, but the main instrument of struggle. Fidel Castro, quotation in the Centro Fidel Castro Ruse. Che's head. The bullets were aimed much more at Che's spirit. Thomas Sankara, you cannot kill ideas. Oh, my stomach. Did you hear that? Oh, no. They wanted his head. A worldwide manhunt, sparing no cost, was launched to track him down. The masters of empire and their minions needed the head of the man who was outsmarting them, and who openly stated his ambition to spark 2, 3, or many Vietnams. Too much damage had already been done in the Caribbean, as well as in Africa. And South America was next. They did not understand this task in metaphorical terms. Apparently, they literally wanted him decapitated, so that his head could be placed in a jar and expedited to Washington as a war trophy. They wanted the head of the rebel who had seen through the psychological warfare undertaken by the US empire in the coup d'etat that would serve as... Oh, let me zoom in for you, sorry. Okay. They wanted the head of the rebel who had seen through the psychological warfare undertaken by the US empire in the coup d'etat that would serve as one of its models for overthrowing governments around the world. This was in Guatemala in the early 1950s, when President Jacobo Arbenz decided to pursue a path of national development rather than have his country remain a woefully underdeveloped banana republic. Such a stance set him on a collision course with the United Fruit Company, which controlled the country as a neo-colony. He had to go, and the empire's other enemy, known as Ernesto Guevara at the time, was there to see it unfold. In the United States' long history of toppling governments, which includes more than 50 since the Second World War, it has consistently combined militant actions with psychological warfare in what we might call the 1-2 punch of empire. The war of hearts and minds, as innumerable internal documents attest, is a foundational aspect of U.S. empire building. In the case of Guatemala, one of the dons of the modern propaganda, who was none other than Freud's double-nephew, oversaw the entire operation for United Fruit, serving as its counsel on public relations since the early 1940s. Edward Bernays opportunistically drew on his uncle's theories to engage in well-paid mass mind manipulation. Sorry, I'm just looking at the notes. I think these are all going to be just sources. It's fine. United Fruit also retained an inside lobbyist in Washington, Thomas G. Corcoran, who had close friends with the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and was involved in a CIA plot to arm Arbenz's opponents, known as Operation Fortune. Soon, multiple agencies of the U.S. government were engaged in what would become known as Operation PBS Success. PB Success. Whose objective was to overthrow the Guatemalan government. This is unsurprising, given the intimate relationship between the bourgeoisie and the bourgeois state. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles had, for decades, been one of United Fruit's principal legal counselors. His brother, Alan, the CIA director, had also done legal work for the company and owed a substantial block of its stock. John Morse Cabot, the Assistant Secretary of State for Inter-American Affairs, was a large shareholder. So was his brother, Thomas Dudley Cabot, the Director of Internal Security Affairs of the State Department, who had been United Fruit's president. Dulles' CIA thus undertook a major psychological warfare operation that cross-pollinated with the campaign undertaken by Bernays, who collaborated with the agency, and the U.S. mainstream press marched in lockstep to the tune they called. Stephen Kinzer overthrow America's century of regime change in Hawaii to Iraq. Kinzer adds, General Robert Cutler, head of the National Security Council, was its United Fruit's former chairman of the board. John J. McCloy, The president of the International Bank for the Reconstruction and Development was a former board member of United Fruit. Both Undersecretary of State Walter Bedell Smith and Robert Hill, the American ambassador to Costa Rica, would join the board after leaving the government service. On numerous connections between the U.S. capitalist ruling class, the bourgeois state, and the coup d'etat in Guatemala. Also see Stephen Kinsler. Disingenuously depicting Arbenz as a staunch communist with links to the Soviet Union, they stoked the ire of the U.S. public, already broadly inculcated with anti-communist propaganda. The War for Hearts and Minds laid the ideological framework for the CIA's 1954 coup d'état, which put in power the brutal dictator Carlos Castillo Armas, initiating 40 years of military government, death squads, torture, disappearances, mass executions, and unimaginable cruelty, totaling more than 200,000 victims. Indisputably one of the most inhumane chapters of the 20th century. Guevara was radicalized watching the coup unfold, and he joined a medical brigade to support the anti-imperialist resistance. He also learned important lessons, such as the need to arm a liberated people for their own self-defense, and he understood that war is played out on two fronts at once. The psychological battle lays the groundwork for imperialist warfare, preparing for military assaults that would otherwise be unthinkable. It also provides cover during and after the fact. Psy-war, accompanying military war like its shadow. When the man who would become known around the world as Che waged his own war, he also did it on two fronts. Having successfully organized with the Cuban people to overthrow another U.S.-backed dictator, Fulgencio Batista, he engaged in an international intellectual war of liberation. He helped found, among other things, Prensa Latina, Prela, a news outlet that broke the chains of information and imperialism. Two young journalists working for Prela, Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Rodolfo Walsh, discovered and deciphered a CIA telex discussing the planned Bay of Pigs invasion to depose the Cuban government. They shared the information with leaders of the country, who were already aware of it through other channels, and the Cuban people were thereby prepared for the attack and successfully rooted out the agency's invasion. They outsmarted the empire and embarrassed a powerful state agency intent on projecting its omnipotence. Impotence. It's important to note that the U.S. government knew full well of Moscow was not conspiring to spread the so-called virus of communism to the doorstep of the United States, even though this is what the propaganda campaign claimed. The Soviets had no military, economic, or even diplomatic relations with Guatemala, and a study by the State Department itself had found the few Guatemala communists to be indigenous to the area. Unable to kill him in Cuba and incapable of defeating him in Africa, they tracked him down in Bolivia, where he was training guerrillas to overthrow yet another U.S.-backed dictatorship. Having financed, armed, and trained counter-revolutionary battalions in the country, injecting $15 million between 1962 and 1968, the U.S. war machine, led by CIA officers, continued its manhunt by any means necessary. When they finally caught up with him, they captured him alive. Fearful of how powerful he had become as a symbol and rallying point for the international anti-imperialist movement, they ignominiously murdered him. The movement was thereby decapitated, or so they hoped. So they hoped. Double nephew means related through brother, sister, and their partner. It's not a common term these days. Interesting. Thank you. Double nephew. Hi, Neuro. They did not only want to kill the man, however, they wanted to kill the ideas and values he embodied. They therefore undertook a battle to take control of his literary estate by overseeing the publication of his Bolivarian diary. It had fallen into the hands of the United States local strongman Bolivian dictator Rene Barrientos, who immediately sent copies to the CIA, the Pentagon, and the U.S. government. The Barrientos regime eventually sought to auction off its publication rights to the highest bidder. Two intelligence assets vied for the rights. Andrew St. George, who had worked for the U.S. Army's intelligence service and was suspected of having links to espionage agencies, negotiated for Magnum Publishing. Then Solstein stepped in with his own publishing house. Stein was an across-the-board anti-communist propagandist who had been on the CIA's payroll at least twice, served as the executive director of the agency-supported American Committee for Cultural Freedom, ACCF, ran the ACCF's new leader, collaborated with the Psychological Strategy Board, PSB, and worked with the U.S. propaganda agency Voice of America, alongside the Frankfurt School scholar Leo Lowenthal. Henry Butterfield Ryan maintains that it was the company, as the CIA is known in internal parlance, that almost certainly secured the Bolivian diaries for Stein's publishing house. The left organized a counterattack. Journalist Michel Rey negotiated on behalf of French publisher Jean-Jacques Pauvert. The Yankees, the Yankees? I think this is Yankees, right? The Yankees were shadowing her, sharing intelligence reports with the Bolivian generals, and her financial ceiling, despite her bluffs, was far lower than the agency collaborators could muster. Barney Rossett of Grove Press also tried his luck and was able to publish 6 pages of Che's diary in his Evergreen Review. Reactionary Cuban exiles responded by bombing the Grove Press offices in downtown New York. And this time, they did not miss their target, as they had in 1964, when they turned a bazooka on the United Nations during Che's speech. Grove Press filed a lawsuit accusing the CIA of being behind the bombing, as well as engaging in surveillance, infiltration, and economic sabotage by covertly financing Grove's competitors like Prager Inc. and Fodor Inc. Castro, for his part, published what he could as quickly as possible, and he signed an agreement with Ramparts to serialize English translations. It was a veritable war of ideas, and it knew no limits. The agency responsible for assassinating Che was not satisfied with his murder. It sought to kill his revolutionary legacy and the ideas he incarnated. Its agents were committed to taking ownership over the past and present by rewriting history to fit their narrative, and then flooding the market with their imperialist propaganda, which they fabricated with the assistance of collaborationists, academics, journalists, publishers, and public relations experts. The publisher, Stein, who worked for the same agency that had assassinated the iconic revolutionary, thereby collaborated with an editor who published numerous signs of being an agent of the CIA, Daniel James, to publish their own version of Che's Bolivian diary. Without, of course, mentioning that this was a company product, an agent in CIA lingo, is generally anyone mobilized by the agency for its agenda, though it is sometimes used to refer to a paid operative, whereas an officer is a full-time employee. According to their account of history, the aim of Che's intervention in Bolivia was not a liberation from dictatorship. It was rather to create enough trouble for the Bolivian government that it would be forced to ask for major American intervention. However, the CIA connected writer claimed in his nearly 60-page introduction, Che lacked the ability to plan a military campaign, and returning to guerrilla life at 39 after 7 years of chauffeur-driven limousines and comparatively rich living cannot have been easy. What? And so, that's what. That's such a silly idea. Limousines. Okay. In spite of his purported inabilities in bourgeois softening, though, Che was apparently driven to try and fail, because otherwise he would have fallen by the wayside and become lost to history. He needed a revolution far more than the revolution needed him. His final quixotic quest for fame and glory led nowhere, however, other than the definitive destruction of the myth of Che Guevara as a great guerrilla technician. Yeah. Since the expression CIA agent is widely used to refer to an employee of their agency, including a lot of the secondary literature, agent is sometimes used in this more expansive sense of this book. Okay. The context should clarify how the term is to be understood. Okay. Thanks, Gabe. Thanks, Gabe. The author of these lines, Daniel James, likely began a relationship with the CIA when he worked as a journalist for one of the magazines it funded, The New Leader, which was in the network of the ACCF and had actively participated in the propaganda blitz against Guatemala mentioned above. Bernays had a close relationship with the magazine and was a close friend of the executive director, Sol Levitas. In fact, James made a major contribution to this anti-communist campaign by penning a book that alleged that Guatemala's land reform was part of a sinister Soviet plot. He never mentions the CIA in the book, even as a suspected patron of the insurgents. However, it showed definitive signs of CIA collaboration and was published by a company, Conduit. James's red design for the Americas, Guatemalan Prelude, was so beloved by United Fruit that the company behind the 1954 coup brought up copies and distributed them to the media. The same CIA-aligned writer was thus involved in the Psy War to overthrow Guatemala, as well as the fight to take ownership over Che's legacy. Although the imperialist propagandists lost this battle, thanks to Castro, Rey, Ramparts, and many others, they certainly did not give up on the war of ideas. The professional propagandist Daniel James began working on a biography of Che, which was published in 1969 by Stein's CIA-linked publishing house. Hackneyed anti-communism was its hallmark, and it depicted Che as more of an apostle of violence than a maker of revolution. Its conclusion, which was that the slogan "Che lives," resonates almost exclusively within a small pathological minority in the West, gives a clear sense of its overall tenor. Even in the West, where he has a wider appeal, Che lives principally for small minority groups. The extremist students, the new left, and some old left retreads. The incurably romantic liberals who cannot live without Caudillo-type symbols. The rebellious adolescents, and the frustrated middle-aged who are as much fans of Bonnie and Clyde, the Boston Strangler, and any anti-hero whose trademark is violence as they are of Che. Huh? Some of those things are not like the others. Okay. All right. The cure for propaganda, Edward Bernays mentioned, fondly quoting a magazine writer and editor, is more propaganda. This is certainly true for the ongoing war over Che's life and legacy, including the incessant attempts to exonerate the U.S. government for his murder. Michael Ratner and Michael Stephen Smith have provided an overview of some of these endeavors, while also laying out extensive documentary evidence to the contrary, reminding their readers that the accused is a well-known serial killer. The United States was involved in the assassination of at least 18 other prominent leaders between 1948 to 1967. It was the U.S. government's interest to have Che killed. The CIA and U.S. Special Forces trained the Bolivian Ranger Battalion that captured Che. CIA agents disguised as Bolivian officers accompanied the Rangers into the field. The U.S. supplied the weapons and provided the intelligence. And a CIA agent apparently was present at the time of his murder. Hi, Timo. Hello. One of the most interesting cases is Henry Butterfield Ryan's The Fall of Che Guevara, which Oxford University Press published in 1998. Ratner and Smith describe Ryan's book as the best researched account of Che's murder, and Ryan does not come closer to pinning the responsibility on the United States than other publications. Yet, he ultimately contends that the U.S. government exerted a moderating influence on its Bolivian allies in dealing with Guevara, and it neither killed him nor ordered him to be killed. Bullshit. To understand such a conclusion, it is helpful to note that Ryan, very much like Daniel James, has a series of connections that allows us to contextualize his work within the larger war of ideas. Although his byline for the book refers to him simply as a retired United States service officer, foreign service officer, and professional historian, he spent 25 years working in the United States Information Agency, USIA. Here's how former USIA Director Alvin Snyder candidly describes its role. The U.S. government ran a full-service public relations organization, the largest in the world, about the size of the 20 biggest U.S. commercial PR firms combined. Its full-time professional staff of more than 10,000 spread out among 150 countries, burnished America's image, and trashed the Soviet Union 2,500 hours a week with a Tower of Babel comprised of more than 70 languages to the tune of over $2 billion per year. The biggest branch of this propaganda machine is called the United States Information Agency. Reed Harris laid out the objectives of the USIA's book program in the following terms. We have books written to our own stipulations, books that would not otherwise be put out, especially those books that are strongly anti-communist. We control the book from its conception down to the final edited manuscript. Ryan spent his career working for this propaganda agency. His book on Che's murder was written at the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy at Georgetown University, which is stocked with the national... Wait. I know that! Wait, isn't that the same place that produced the famine genocide myth of Ukraine? Wasn't that literally cited in the last book? It's all coming together. It's all coming together, dude. Okay. His book on Che's murder was written at the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy at Georgetown University, which is stocked with national security state operatives and even served as the publisher for a 1993 USIA report that Ryan helped oversee. He acknowledged, moreover, that his book was reviewed by U.S. officials and a CIA officer. but not by Castro or his supporters. This lifelong propagandist was clearly part of the historical cleanup crew, and he endeavored once again to whitewash the crimes of empire by academically laundering state disinformation. The intellectual war is incessant. Uh, Wait, we're almost done? Oh, I thought this would be way longer. Okay. Finish. I'll finish. To return to the man, a CIA writer compared to the Boston Strangler, they literally wanted Che's head. His assassins wanted to cut it off and send it to Washington via La Paz. Such a war trophy deserved to be admired by the masters of the game who had ordered and commissioned it, but did not want blood on their hands, always preferring plausible deniability. The idea was apparently deemed too barbaric in the telling of words of on-site CIA operative Felix Rodriguez, who proposed cutting off a finger instead. The compromise reached was equally significant. His murderers decided to sever the revolutionaries' hands. Since the oligarchs of imperialism generally do not want to look their victims in the eye, they prefer beheading without a barbaric face. They would have it their way, thanks to the hands of their assassins. In the end, they ultimately preferred to have his head in the figurative sense. They wanted him dead, and they wanted to kill the idea that he embodied by taking over his legacy, thereby decapitating the global anti-imperialist movement. It is often said, when you lose an ally on the left, that you can kill a person, but you cannot kill an idea. This trilogy is an extended study of the forces in the world that have sought to put a much more radical thesis to the test, namely, that by killing an idea, that of communism, you can destroy a lot more people, as well as the planet. Their failure is a testament to humanity. Beautiful. That's beautiful. Okay, so I guess that's like our intro, which is all I really planned to read tonight, but I could be convinced to read more. I don't want people to miss too much, is all. It's pretty easy to read. So that's nice. I appreciate that. This chapter's long. Okay. It is long. Maybe not. Maybe I don't do this. Okay, so 46 is the end, and it starts where? Testament to humanity, yeah. 25. So it's 20 pages. I think that's like a good section to read next time. The Holodomor stuff, yes.